Hey, what is up? What's going on? Arvind Ramakrishna here, and today we're going to be talking about perspective hacks. And I've got 3 tips on how to improve and simplify your shapes and perspective. So let's get started. You know, I got to tell you something. Perspective sucks. It sucks big time. And it sucks because a lot of the times when we start to draw things in perspective is because we try to overcomplicate things, or we try to maybe challenge ourselves before we are ready for that particular challenge. So I'm going to say that when you start off with trying to draw objects in perspective, my first number 1 tip is to pick a simple object. A lot of people try to pick an object that is super complicated, and then they end up having a lot of difficulty trying to rationalize those shapes in their brain and trying to figure out, what does this thing look like when I start to draw this at a particular angle, or just foreshorten it in perspective. And it gets a little bit hard that way, because when you start to look at very complicated shapes, you haven't really nailed down some of the fundamental forms. And so sometimes when you're drawing, let's say, a cube, cubes are, fundamental shapes. They are fundamental forms, and they're very easily, or your mind is very easily able to rationalize those shapes in perspective. That's not the case when you're starting to work with amorphous shapes or organic shapes, because there's more technique that's involved in that, and you're not going to be able to understand those techniques, or at least be able to execute, unless you try to draw more simplified shapes in perspective. So that's the first thing that you need to do, is just to make sure that the object that you're picking is pretty simple. Now, I'm drawing this toy car. It's a Honda City. It's one of these tiny little race cars. In fact, I'm using one of my Hot Wheels. It's a little turbo Honda, and very cute little toy, very cute little car. And what I find pretty striking about it is, because when you look at these cars from the 80s, I mean, they're boxy, right? I mean, there's nothing to these cars, and it's an excellent source for you to be able to pick up some of these Hot Wheels and just to kind of understand the basic forms that are coming out of these Hot Wheels, and then trying to replicate them. So here what I've done is just to draw that side view, so it gives me a general idea of what this profile looks like. And then when we go into perspective, it should help you to sort of rationalize it. So what I'm going to do here is to get this little profile view in perspective, and I'm just going to draw my lines and extend them. And that kind of brings to my second tip, is to break down that object into their very primitive shapes. So we've got a lower portion of the shape of this car, and then you've got the greenhouse area. And all I'm doing here is just to say, well, all right, I've got this particular proportion and shape. How do I rationalize that now in space? So that's all I'm doing here, is to just break things down, start drawing things like your center line, so you know where the center of this shape is, and just start to build it out. So I'm extending the front end of the car after I've got the main basic shape and the profile of the vehicle, and then I'm just starting to add the bumper, and then I'm starting to add the hood scoop. Just small, tiny little details that I can add. And then the second thing here I'm doing is just to make sure that I'm adding a section, so I kind of know what are these shapes doing. And you're sort of just kind of extruding all of that shape along that profile. So as you can see, all I'm doing is just trying to build these shapes. I'm adding basic shape after basic shape, or I guess primitive shape after primitive shape, and just tacking them on to the base of the object, or the basic shape of the object. So if you tackle it that way and just start to modularize your drawing, that's really going to help you. It's going to help your brain sort of catch up to what's going on and what's happening. So you really have to make sure that you're pacing yourself and making sure that you're not trying to start off with something too complicated. And if you are starting with something a little bit more challenging, then you go through this process of breaking it down. Now the third tip that I got up there is to start shading, and of course adding some shaded elements and just changing the value here. So in this instant I've got basically these three sides. You've got the side facing, which is the profile of the vehicle, and the way I'm shading it here is just to kind of show that profile side, which is the side that's closest to the viewing point, is the shadow side. So that's going to be the darkest. And then the top, I'm going to just say that the light source is coming directly from the top, and that's going to be the lightest side. And then of course if you look at the front of the vehicle, that's going to be sort of in between the shaded side and then the lighter side. And then all I'm going to do now is just finish off the entire drawing by just silhouetting it so I can remind myself of what this basic shape looks like. So that's about it. I hope you enjoyed this video on our top 3 tips on simplifying shapes in perspective. And if you enjoyed this content, tell your friends about it. Let them know and have them subscribe to this channel. And if you have any other questions, just comment below and I'll be glad to answer them. And we'll see you next time on Driven to Draw. Have a good one.